The fever
England,
takes him.
1399.
He does not have long.
A candlelit royal
Keep the
chamber.
cloths ready.
The only sound
must
is a
contain
quill
the
scratching
sickness.
hard against parchment.
Perhaps an
Because someone is
application of
writing the
boiled
safest
herbs,
lie
Your
a kingdom
Majesty.
can be given.
Yes, that should
The
purge
king
the
has a
humours.
minor leg ailment. But the truth isn't in the letter.
Curie
The
eleison.
truth is in the room.
Christe
The way the
eleison.
physicians won't meet each other's eyes.
Suscipe domine
The way a
anima
servant
meius.
presses vinegar-soaked cloth to his nose like he's walking into a crime scene. Because Henry IV, the man who stole the crown from Richard II, is being robbed
He
again.
cannot last the
Not
night,
by
Your
rebels,
Grace.
not by
The
assassins,
crown must be
by
secured
something
before
inside
dawn.
his own body,
The king's ring.
something
Ensure
that leaks,
you have it.
swells, and slowly turns a living king into a problem everyone must pretend not to smell. Here's the part history class won't say out loud. Henry didn't
He
lose
cannot
power
last
because he
the
was
night.
weak.
We
He
must
lost
secure
power
the
because his
succession
body
now.
forced him
What
into
of the Duke of
humiliation
Clarence?
no king can confess.
He is already dealt with.
Until even sitting on the throne became torture. Tonight we're reopening the medical file and the political cover-up behind it. Because the real horror isn't what happened to his skin. It's what happened next, behind locked doors, with iron tools, no anesthesia, and a secret so obscene it could collapse a dynasty. Before we rewind to the first symptom, tell me where you're watching from. Because wherever you are, you've seen power hide the truth. And this king's illness might not have been an illness at all. In the medieval world, leprosy wasn't
Where
a
am
medical
I?
term.
What do you
it was a
call this
sentence.
chamber? It is the
You didn't
Jerusalem
get
chamber, Your
diagnosed.
Grace.
You got
Then
branded.
the prophecy is
If
fulfilled.
people believed you had it, your
His
body became
pulse is
proof that God
fading
had rejected
rapidly.
you. Not
There is
metaphorically,
nothing more we can do.
legally, socially,
God
spiritually.
save the king.
A man could lose his property, his legitimacy, even the right to be touched. The disease didn't just attack tissue, it attacked your identity.
He is struck down.
And
God
that's why the
save the
rumour
king.
around Henry IV was more dangerous than any sword. Because Henry didn't
What is
inherit
this
the crown.
sickness?
He took it. In 1399, he overthrew Richard II, and in doing so, he created a regime built on a single fragile thing: public belief. He needed the realm to accept that what happened was necessary, not criminal. But the moment his body began to show signs of decay, pale patches, sores, skin that looked wrong under candlelight, the political meaning was immediate. In this era, sickness wasn't random. It was evidence. A
He is
divine
falling.
verdict you could
Help
smell.
the king. Fetch
So the court
aid.
doesn't treat it like a health issue. They treat it like
My
an
lord.
assassination attempt
My
made by
lord.
God. Physicians stop speaking loudly. Servants are warned to repeat nothing. A minor ailment becomes a classified threat because a king who looks cursed invites rebellion in every corner of the kingdom. Now, from a forensic perspective, we have to slow down and ask the uncomfortable question: was this actually Hansen's disease? True leprosy existed in medieval Europe, but many conditions were labelled leprosy because the word was useful. Psoriasis, lupus, chronic dermatitis, even severe infections. Leprosy was the perfect accusation because it carried moral authority and could not be disproven by the science of the time, and Henry's case sits right inside that ambiguity. Some chroniclers describe a skin condition, weakness, and recurring episodes that don't fit neatly into one modern diagnosis. The symptoms move, flare, retreat, then return. That pattern can look autoimmune, it can look neurological, it can look like multiple problems stacking over time, but politically it doesn't matter what it truly was. The label alone was lethal. Once the whisper starts, the damage is done. Because leprosy wasn't just an illness, it was propaganda. If Henry is rotting, then Richard II becomes a martyr. If Henry is cursed, then the usurpation becomes a sin the country must pay for. And in a realm still raw from deposition and execution, that story spreads faster than any infection ever could. It moves through taverns, monasteries, noble households. Everywhere people are already waiting for a sign that the new king is illegitimate. The skin begins to weep. Bandages multiply. Incense burns heavier, not for comfort, but to control the atmosphere, to keep the court functional, to keep men from stepping back when the king enters a room. And just as the rumour reaches its peak, something worse begins to surface, something the court cannot explain away as a rash, or a leg, or a temporary weakness. Because while England watches for sores, the king's body is preparing a symptom so humiliating, so private, and so medically brutal. It will make the rot on his skin look merciful by comparison. If you're here for the history they didn't teach you in school, the history that bleeds, subscribe. Because we're about to cross the threshold the chronicles only hint at and step into the one room where a king can't hide behind titles, armour or ceremony. The private chamber. The place where power stops being political and becomes biological. Outside that door, Henry IV is still the king. Men still bow. Clerks still write orders in his name. But inside the air is different. Heavy. Shut in. Warmed by bodies and candle smoke. Layered with incense that isn't there for holiness anymore but for control. A servant moves quietly with a basin and clothes, never meeting the king's eyes. Physicians speak in half sentences, their mouths close to each other's ears. Even silence has rules here, because one loose word could turn rumour into revolt. And then the camera finally goes where the kingdom is forbidden to look. We don't see battle scars. We don't see heroic illness. We see bandages. Linen wrapped too low, too tight, too carefully placed. We see the way the doctors hesitate before touching them, as if they're unwrapping a crime scene instead of treating a monarch. We hear the smaller sounds, fabric lifting, breath catching, the faint wet pull of cloth against skin that shouldn't be exposed to air. This is the gateway. The moment the story stops being about a leg ailment and becomes something that has to be hidden at any cost. Because what's happening to Henry isn't just humiliating, it's politically fatal. A king can survive pain, he can survive weakness, but he cannot survive the world learning where his body is failing, and what the doctors find under those bandages will force a decision no court wants to make, and no man wants to endure. It will lead to a surgery so brutal, so intimate, and so medieval in its cruelty. It still survives in history as a footnote of horror. Because the next chapter isn't about a crown. It's about what happens when a king can't sit on his own throne. In 1405, Henry IV made a decision that didn't just change politics, it changes the temperature of the kingdom. He orders the execution of Archbishop Richard Scrope, a man whose rank is supposed to place him beyond ordinary punishment. This isn't a common trait. This is a church figure, a symbol, a living piece of sacred authority. Killing him sends one message across England. The crown will spill holy blood if it has to. The set piece is recorded with the kind of clarity that survives because it shocked everyone who witnessed it. The axe comes down, the crowd goes still, and almost immediately Henry collapses. Not later that night, not after a slow fever. The timing is what makes the scene feel cursed. The king's body fails at the exact moment the churchman dies, as if the execution reaches across distance and strikes him in return. Men around Henry rush forward, but even they hesitate, because touching a king in public is dangerous unless invited. He slumps, his breathing wrong, his face draining of colour, and then the skin changes. According to accounts, his body erupts in raw, angry pustules, red, inflamed lesions appearing with shocking speed, as if the surface of him is suddenly rejecting what's inside. To modern eyes, it reads like a violent flare-up, immune system chaos, vascular reaction, possibly infection accelerating under stress. To the medieval mind watching it happen, it reads like a verdict, a divine stroke. Because in this world, God doesn't send letters, God sends symptoms, and the symptom is visible to everyone. The court reacts like a containment team, not emotional, not compassionate, operational. They close ranks, they move Henry out of sight, they flood the space with bodies that block the view, creating a wall between the king and the public narrative. A servant runs for cloth, another for vinegar, someone whispers for physicians, someone else whispers for priests because medicine and salvation are not separate categories here. Inside the private chamber, the atmosphere turns forensic. The doctors don't just treat a rash, they treat a political emergency. Linen is soaked, ointments are applied, the lesions are covered fast, not because they are painful, but because they are evidence. If England sees a king marked like this, England will ask why. And if England asks why, the answer that spreads fastest won't be dermatology, it will be punishment. That's the psychological horror of Henry's condition. Every symptom is interpreted as guilt made physical. A king who stole a crown, who crushed rebellion, who now kills an archbishop, suddenly looks like a man being branded by God in real time. The word leprosy doesn't need confirmation. It only needs a trigger. This is that trigger. Even the people paid to protect him started adjusting their behaviour. Some step back when the cloth comes off, some keep their eyes fixed on the floor. Nobody says the obvious out loud because saying it makes it real. But the instinct is immediate. If this is divine judgment, then proximity is danger. Henry survives the eruption. The lesions eventually subside. The surface closes. The court breathes again, cautiously, as if the crisis has passed. But recovery in this story is never a relief. It is always a setup. Because while the skin begins to heal, something deeper is shifting. A symptom that cannot be displayed, cannot be discussed, cannot be admitted even to allies, is beginning to take shape in the one place royal dignity depends on remaining intact. He survived the eruption, but the recovery was a trap, because while his skin began to close, his internal organs were beginning to collapse outward. By 1406, the court was no longer pretending the problem was temporary. The king is bedridden, sealed behind curtains and guards, while official letters continue to circulate with the same careful lie. A leg ailment. That phrase becomes a shield, repeated until it sounds normal, because the truth cannot be spoken without humiliating the crown itself. In a medieval monarchy, the king's body is not private property. It is the state. If that body is failing in a shameful place, the kingdom is failing with it. So Henry summons a specialist, not a priest, not another court physician with herbs and prayers. He summons John of Ardern, the surgeon known for treating conditions no one else will name in public. This is forensic medicine in its rawest form. Not theory, not philosophy, steel, force, and survival. The decision alone tells you how severe the situation has become. A king does not call this man unless the alternative is death. The leg was never the story. Behind the locked door, the real crisis is revealed as a rectal prolapse. Internal tissue forced outward, the body turning itself inside out in the most degrading way possible. The language of the court cannot hold it. There is no respectful title for it. There is only the physical fact, a ruler who cannot control his own anatomy, whose suffering is not heroic but humiliating, whose pain cannot be displayed because display would destroy legitimacy. The chamber becomes a surgical scene. Candlelight shakes against stone walls. Linen is laid down like battlefield cloth. Servants are cleared out, replaced by a smaller circle who know exactly what they are witnessing and will spend the rest of their lives pretending they didn't. The air carries sweat, incense, and something sharper. The odour of sickness trapped too long beneath fabric. Henry is positioned like a patient, not a monarch. His dignity is removed by necessity. There is no anaesthesia. There is no mercy beyond speed. Iron instruments are prepared cold, because in this era warmth is rare and sterility is fantasy. The surgeon's hands are experienced, not clean by modern standards, and his authority in the room is absolute because everyone understands the stakes. If this fails, the king may not survive the night. The procedure is brutal in its simplicity. The goal is to return what should be inside back to where it belongs and keep it there. That requires force and restraint. It requires manipulation of tissue already inflamed, already damaged, already unable to hold itself in place. Henry's reactions have to be controlled, because shock alone can kill him, and yet there is no way to soften what is happening. Pain is the price of containment. Every movement risks tearing. Every delay risks infection. Every minute exposes the monarchy to the truth it cannot survive. This is the real horror of the leg ailment. It isn't just that Henry is suffering. It's that the King of England is being reduced to a body on a sheet, enduring the kind of surgery men whisper about like a curse. His crown is irrelevant here. His power cannot command muscle to tighten or tissue to heal. The only thing that matters is whether the surgeon can keep the state from collapsing out of its own ruler. The surgery works, technically. It saves his life. But it leaves a permanent cost. The kind no chronicler writes cleanly, because it is too obscene for official memory. The king survives, yet the act of surviving destroys something essential. The basic ability to sit, to ride, to appear in public without betraying weakness. The throne is not symbolic, it is physical. It demands the body perform. And Henry's body no longer can. The surgery saved his life, but it destroyed the king's ability to perform his most vital duty, sitting the throne. After the surgery, the court doesn't relax, it tightens. Henry IV remains alive, but he returns to the world wrapped in bandages and rules. The palace learns a new etiquette built on fear and denial. You don't ask how the king is feeling. You don't look too long at the linens being carried out of his chamber. You don't comment on why the windows are open in cold weather. And you never, under any circumstances, say the real name of what's happening to him. The official story stays the same. The leg ailment. A phrase repeated so often it becomes the sound of a lock turning. The chamber becomes the centre of gravity. Curtains stay drawn. Servants move in patterns that minimize time near the bed. A small, controlled team handles the king's dressings, and they do it quietly, almost clinically, like a crew cleaning evidence before it contaminates the rest of the building. Fabric disappears into basins. Hot water is requested more often. Herbs are burned constantly, not as prayer but as containment, strong scents pressed into the air to keep something worse from spreading. Because the smell is the real problem. Incense can mask many things, but it can't erase rot. Under the sweet heaviness of frankincense and myrrh, there is a darker layer that keeps returning, faint, sour, biological. A sick-room odour that clings to stone and follows anyone who has been close. People begin to recognise it without naming it. They take shorter breaths. They keep a half-step of distance. They angle their bodies when they speak to him, as if the air itself carries consequence. The king's presence is no longer only political. It's physical. It demands endurance, and endurance has a cost. Henry can't ride. He can't travel as he once did. He can't lead troops in person, or appear suddenly in a province to crush dissent by sheer visibility. In medieval politics, the king's body is a weapon. Movement proves authority. A king who can't mount a horse begins to lose more than strength. He loses reach. Decisions that used to be enforced by presence now have to be enforced by letters and deputies always have their own interests. That's how authority leaks away. Not in a single dramatic moment, but in small absences that accumulate. A meeting was postponed. A journey was cancelled. A court session shortened because the king can't sit upright long enough. Men start learning that the throne can be bypassed. Councils begin to form around the bed instead of beneath the crown, and the tone shifts. Less reverence, more calculation. Everyone listens for weakness the way wolves listen for limping. The silence becomes strategic. No one challenges Henry openly because they don't need to. They wait. They adjust. They let time do the work. The king's vitality becomes a resource the court monitors like weather. How many days has he been unseen? How often are the physicians summoned? How quickly do messengers enter and leave his chamber? Every change becomes data. Every symptom becomes a political forecast. Henry senses it. Behind the curtains he is still conscious, still intelligent, still aware of the shape of the room even when he can't stand in it. But awareness doesn't restore control. The bed becomes a throne made of fabric and pain, and his kingdom is now managed by men who can walk, ride, hunt, and fight. Men whose bodies still work. And that is where the psychological horror sharpens. Because Henry didn't just steal a crown. He built a regime that depends entirely on stability, and now his own body is the unstable element inside it. The sickness that must never be spoken has become the loudest force in the palace, shaping every decision without ever being acknowledged. As the king vanishes behind the curtains of his bed, a new shadow begins to grow in the palace, one that didn't share his father's blood or his father's patience. The court doesn't stay silent forever. It fractures. Because Henry IV is no longer the only Henry in the room. His son, Prince Henry, the future Henry V, moves through the palace like a different species. Young, athletic, sharp-eyed, built for the world his father can't enter anymore. He rides, he fights, he appears in public without bandages, without weakness, without the smell that forces men to breathe shallowly. And in a monarchy that worships physical dominance, that contrast becomes political oxygen, the prince doesn't need to say he's impatient. His body says it for him. Every time he returns from the field, spattered with dust, armour scraped, posture confident, he brings proof that the crown can still look strong. Courtiers cluster around him because he feels like the future, not a theory, an arriving fact. And the more Henry IV disappears behind curtains and illness, the more the prince becomes the version of kingship England remembers how to obey. This is where the tension becomes lethal. The father still rules, technically. The state still speaks in his name. But the son starts to rule by momentum. He becomes the active arm of the regime while the king becomes the locked heart behind it. Henry IV issues commands from his litter, through messengers, through councils that translate his will. Prince Henry builds a reputation in the open, where loyalty is earned in real time. One Henry governs through paperwork, the other governs through presence. The palace splits accordingly. You can see it in small behaviours first, who attends which meetings, who gets updates first, who people turn toward when bad news arrives. Then it becomes structural. Two circles form, overlapping but not trusting each other. One loyal to the sick king, cautious, protective, invested in keeping the illusion of control intact. The other orbiting the prince, energetic, impatient, already imagining the next reign as a solution to the current decay. And Henry IV isn't blind to this. He can't ride, but he can read a room. He can hear the changes in tone. He can measure the delay between his order and its execution. He can feel how quickly news flows to his son's side before it reaches his bed. A king who took a crown by force understands the shape of a coup even when it's disguised as help. The prince, meanwhile, learns the most dangerous lesson a successor can learn, that the kingdom still functions without the king's body present. The army moves, decisions get made, men obey. The machine doesn't stop when Henry IV collapses, it simply roots around him. That creates a quiet contempt that doesn't need to be spoken. To the prince, waiting starts to feel unnecessary. To the court, the prince starts to feel inevitable, and inevitability is the most corrosive force in a sick palace. Because once people believe the next reign has already begun, they start behaving like it. The father and son don't have to declare war on each other for the conflict to exist. It's already happening in the gaps, between meetings, between messengers, between the moments Henry IV is too weak to appear and Prince Henry is strong enough to replace him. And somewhere in that tension, a new horror forms. Not disease, not surgery, not rot. Succession as predation. A son whose ambition is clean and bright, contrasted against a father who is decaying in private. A throne that can only hold one body at a time. The prince wasn't just waiting for the crown. He was already rehearsing his father's funeral, and the king knew it. By 1408, Henry IV's court began living in a new rhythm. Collapse, panic, denial, repeat. His illness no longer moves in a straight line. It loops. He weakens, rallies just enough to be seen, then drops again without warning. And every time it happens, the palace reacts like a machine trained for disaster, but addicted to the idea that disaster might finally be over. One collapse is recorded with a particular cruelty. The king falls still, breathing thins, the colour drains from his face. A physician leans in too close, fingers hovering near his mouth, counting seconds like they're watching a rope snap. Someone whispers the word no one wants to say but everyone is waiting for. Dead. And once that word enters the air, the court changes instantly. Not publicly. No one runs into the streets. Not openly. No trumpets. No proclamation. But the internal atmosphere flips. Bodies move faster. Faces tighten into expressions they can't quite control. Men who have spent years biting back impatience suddenly allow a fraction of relief to show through. Because a sick king is dangerous, unpredictable, expensive, and humiliating. But a dead king is a clean problem with a clean solution. Succession. Messages begin forming in people's minds before they are written. Positions are imagined. Rooms are mentally reassigned. Loyalists start calculating how quickly they need to pivot to survive the next reign. And somewhere in that quiet, private celebration, the palace reveals its true nature. Not a family, not a court of honour, but a waiting room for power. Then Henry gasps. It's small at first. A harsh pull of air like something tearing open. A twitch. A sound that shouldn't exist if death had actually won. Eyes widened. The physician freezes. The room goes silent so violently you can hear a fabric shift. Then another breath comes, wet, laboured, real. He isn't dead. He's back. And the terror that follows is worse than grief, because now everyone understands what just happened inside them. They were ready. They were relieved. Some of them were even happy. And the king has returned from the edge with enough awareness to read that truth on their faces. This is the psychological trap of the false ending. Henry survives, but now he knows who celebrated. From a medical perspective, the pattern is consistent with chronic systemic collapse. Multi-organ failure doesn't always end cleanly. It produces episodes that mimic death. Sudden drops in consciousness, near cessation of breath, body temperature shifting, pulse becoming thread-like and hard to find. In a medieval setting with no reliable diagnostics, these moments are indistinguishable from the end. The king isn't recovering. He's rehearsing death. Over and over, trapped in a loop where the body keeps shutting down and restarting like a failing mechanism. The court becomes addicted to the almost. Every collapse triggers the same cycle. Panic in the chamber, suppressed excitement in the hallways, political recalculation everywhere. Every rally forces everyone to pretend loyalty again, to act shocked, to praise God for mercy, to swallow their impatience like poison. That repetition grinds the palace into something unstable, where hope and dread blur together. By 1409, the false endings had happened more than once. The third death arrives like a cruel joke played by biology. Again the room tightens. Again men prepare to pivot. Again the future flashes into view like a door cracking open. And again Henry returns. But this time the aftershock is different, because the king doesn't just wake up confused. He wakes up with purpose. He demands documents. He insists on being propped up. He wants to sign, to declare, to lock the kingdom into his will before his body can betray him again. The act is painful. Sitting upright costs him breath. Ink trembles in his grasp. But he forces it, because a king who cannot stand will at least leave his orders standing. He survived his third death. But when he finally sat up to sign his will, he realized the prophecy he'd spent a lifetime running from had just entered the palace. In March 1413, Henry IV is brought to Westminster, and the setting itself feels like judgment. Westminster Abbey is cold stone and sacred air, a place built to swallow human noise and return it as echo. Candles flicker against carved saints. The smell of wax and incense hangs heavy, but it can't fully erase the other scent that has followed Henry for years, the faint biological reminder that the body beneath the crown has been failing in private. He has come here because kings do what kings can when their bodies betray them. They seek proximity to holiness. They seek ritual. They seek the appearance of control. Henry makes it only part way. He collapses inside the abbey for the final time, the kind of collapse that doesn't look like exhaustion but like a system shutting off. Men reach for him, then hesitate, caught between urgency and etiquette. The king is lifted, moved, carried out of the open space before the public can fully register what they've seen. The palace machinery engages automatically. Conceal the weakness, contain the rumour, keep the myth intact. They take him into a chamber nearby, a private room meant for rest, for clerical work, for royal preparation. And this is where the prophecy closes its trap. For years, Henry has lived with a warning hanging over him like a sentence. He would die in Jerusalem. Whether it was spoken by an astrologer, a cleric, or carried through court gossip, the effect is the same. The king believes it, or at least fears it enough to shape his choices around it. He avoids the Holy Land. He does not launch the crusade he once imagined. He treats Jerusalem like a geographic threat, a location he can refuse, a destination he can simply never enter. That is the medieval mistake, thinking fate is a place you can outrun. Now Henry is lying on a bed, breathing unevenly, his body too weak to perform dignity anymore. The room swims in and out of focus. The voices of advisors come in fragments. Someone offers water, someone offers prayer, someone tries to speak gently, as if gentleness can alter biology. And in that failing moment, Henry asks a question that doesn't sound political but is. He asks the name of the room. It isn't small talk, it's verification. It's the last attempt to check the edge of the map before falling off it. A man answers him. The Jerusalem chamber. The words land like iron, because Henry understands instantly what that means. The prophecy didn't require a journey. It didn't need ships or deserts or crusading banners. It only needed patience. It waited for him inside his own kingdom, inside his own abbey, inside a room with a name that turns geography into inevitability. The psychological horror here is not supernatural. It's the precision of coincidence. A king who stole a crown, survived rebellions, survived surgery, survived false deaths, spent years trying to dodge a predicted ending, has arrived at the exact destination anyway, not by travelling toward it, but by collapsing into it. His breathing worsens, the chamber tightens around him. Men speak less. The air becomes heavy with the sound of a body running out of margin. Henry can no longer command his muscles to rise, his lungs to deepen, his heart to stabilize. All he can do is understand. He thought he had cheated God, but as his breath failed, he realized that Jerusalem isn't a place. It was a room waiting for him all along. When Henry IV finally dies, the court does not celebrate the way it secretly rehearsed. It moves into procedure. Silence becomes official. The body is handled with care that looks like respect but functions like containment, because whatever killed him was never just weakness. It was contamination, political and biological, spreading through every corridor of his reign. The forensic verdict is ugly because it refuses to be clean. Medieval writers used the word leprosy because it was the only language powerful enough to explain what they were seeing. But from a modern perspective, Henry's symptoms don't sit neatly inside one diagnosis. The recurring eruptions, the chronic decline, the episodes of collapse, the humiliating internal failure. This reads more like a collapsing system than a single infection. Autoimmune disease, severe dermatologic conditions, neurological events, chronic inflammation, and the long-term breakdown of bodily control can overlap in ways medieval medicine could only describe as a curse. And then there's the second layer that can't be ignored, the psychology of usurpation. Henry didn't simply wear a crown. He lived inside an ongoing crime scene. He seized the throne in 1399 and spent the rest of his life trying to stabilize what he broke. Every rebellion, every whisper, every suspicious glance was a reminder that his legitimacy depended on fear holding longer than doubt. The body carries stress. It holds it in muscle tension, in sleeplessness, in immune disruption, in years of living as if collapse is always one step away. We can't prove guilt caused disease, but we can say this. The conditions of Henry's reign were ideal for the body to fail loudly, repeatedly, and without mercy. So when the curtains close, the final image is not heroic. It's clinical. A crown sitting on a table next to bloodied bandages, gold and linen, authority and waste. The kingdom distilled into two objects, something that promises immortality and something that proves the body is temporary. Henry Bolingbroke didn't lose his kingdom to an army. He lost it to the one enemy no king can execute, his own flesh. And the most terrifying part, the throne is still there, waiting for the next body to rot. If this case made you see medieval power differently, don't click away yet. There are more rulers whose bodies became the battlefield, and the next story is even harder to sit through. Stay close, subscribe, and be here when the next investigation drops, because the darkest chapters don't wait for a second viewing.